going to talk today about instructions unclear, and that's kind of this meme here was part of the inspiration for this presentation today. What I'd like to do is I'll start with the agenda. And this is just a brief overview of what we'll do. We'll talk about why infographics are effective for online instructions. We'll look at some examples, look at best practices. If we have time, talk about some other applications, and then we'll have a good amount of time for questions and answers. So I'll start with a quick poll, and if you want to write in the chat or just nod your head, whatever you're comfortable with. But as instructors, have you ever said, didn't they read the instructions? I know that's something I have said, and I may have asked students directly before. And my screen's not letting me see this chat, but.
Generally, the answer is coming in.
There it is. Yes, many times. And that can be frustrating as an instructor, but it also we want our students to learn and we want them to read the instructions. And I started with me wondering, are my instructions unclear? I feel that they are. These are, I've been developing these throughout my teaching career. Other people have contributed to them. Other students seem to understand them. What can we do? And I did a little bit of research, well, a lot of research, but you know how that goes, rabbit's hole of research on reading, and particularly in web reading. And some eye tracking studies have shown that 80% of users will only skim the page. The same study, broken down a little bit more specifically, is that when users are reading or skimming a page, they're only reading 20% of the words on the page. I'll let that sink in for a second because I did not enjoy that statistic. So if we look at that even closer, when they broke down through the eye tracking studies, pages that had 111 words, users generally read 50% of those. When they got past about the 600, 800 mark, that's when it started dropping down to that 20% figure. And I don't know about you, but most of my assignment instructions are about 1,000 words. So that told me that my students are reading about 200 of my very carefully chosen words in these assignment instructions. Other research tells us, particularly marketing research, that people respond to visuals. And I don't think that's new information to any of us. But the combination of images and text particularly can really impact our brains, how we grab our readers' attention. Some of the marketing research shows that tweets that have images have 90% more views. Those are the posts that always grab people's attention, more than just plain text. And so I wanted to think about that in terms of my instructions, because I have always given them just in text, whether that be online or, when I taught in person, a printout, but typically everything's in Canvas and it's 100% text. So when I looked at research for images and text, it's shown pretty consistently that this combination can engage students and then thereby motivates them to continue reading, grabs their attention, and then they pay closer attention. Cognitive load is actually decreased with the use of images. That means they can read and process more efficiently, and we can get more information to them. And then this ultimately leads to better comprehension. When they can process the information in a different way and we give them an alternative, it can be effective. Infographics are the perfect combination for images and text because that really is what an infographic does. It takes a more complex idea. It doesn't necessarily simplify it, but what it does is it communicates that message with a limited amount of text and includes visuals. And I'll look at some examples in a little more detail as we go along. One thing that I do want to explain is that infographics are not intended, at least for the purposes that I use them for assignment instructions, are not intended to replace those written instructions. Those written instructions are important, and we want to make sure that we can reach learners on multiple levels. Some students, I know I'm the one who's going to read, every single line in those instructions, but not everyone will. And that's just something to keep in mind. The infographic is not intended to replace. It's there to enhance or reinforce knowledge. If we just only give an infographic without any sort of context, research has shown that users lose interest very quickly. So important to give some prior knowledge. Another aspect is design. And I will briefly talk about design because it is so important, because if the design is ineffective, it will also lose our readers' attention, thereby making it useless. So I want to point you to, there are many, 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 many free infographic programs. I personally use Canva and Piktochart. They're both free. That's one of the main reasons I use them. They do have options where you can pay and upgrade. Piktochart has become a little more expensive, I would say. They used to have a lot more free options. Now you're kind of limited to about 5 designs. So that's just something to keep in mind. It may be worth talking to your department if you think it's something that you'll use consistently, and to see if they can get a membership. It's not a high cost membership. I just don't like to pay for things. So if I can get it for free, I will use it. Canva is, I use Canva to design this presentation. Canva has a lot of free options. And sometimes you can buy something for $1 if you don't want to have a background on it. So definitely recommend those. What's nice about these is that no experience is required. These are designed for beginners. I have 0 background in graphic design. And so these programs are perfect because they are designed to be user-friendly for, the average user. So when we look at infographics, there's some key things to look at. The first is that they come in blocks. Information is chunked. So it usually begins with just a very simple, plain title to grab the reader's attention, make it clear what the purpose of the infographic is. In this case, I would use this to introduce the assignment. I would give the assignment name. I might give the class title, something to that effect. Your body is where obviously the meat is going to be, the meat of your information. You'll notice though that we have a limited amount of text and some very simple illustrations. This is where for assignment instructions, you can highlight important parts of the assignment, where you can break the assignment down into chunks and into steps. And you can also use this chunking to group like information together. Then you have the footer, which is very useful in terms of, you could use that to give additional resources, maybe a link to a lesson, or you could refer back to another concept. You could connect it to the next steps. Where can the student go from here? So there's a lot of great things to do with a footer as well. Some key principles, full disclosure, this was one of the first infographics I made several years ago, and it has some problems. So keep it simple. You want to avoid information overload. The idea is to communicate information as quickly and efficiently as you can, and to make it clear and easy to understand. So that means limited text, simple visuals. You do not have to get fancy. The infographic really speaks for itself. Let it work for you. To do that, you want to limit 2 to 3 font styles. You'll see in this example, there are more than 2 to 3 font styles, and that's a problem. The eye kind of wanders and it doesn't really follow a clear pattern. Here we do start to get into more of a horizontal reading pattern, but it's a little too messy. 3 to 5 colors. So your color palette, you want some contrast, but you also want colors that work well together. In this case, you can see we've got red, green, blue, dark blue, pink, and it's just a little too much and the colors don't quite work together. Thankfully, those free resources that I referred to typically will have templates, and we'll look at those a little bit closer in just a moment, but templates are great because oftentimes they already have those color palettes arranged for you and designed ready for you to go. Speaking of reading patterns, so research, there's a lot of different reading patterns for web users, but the F pattern seems to be pretty consistent over the years. We have advanced in the way we read on the web, and there are other ways that users read. But to keep it simple, try to follow this F pattern in the flow. A zigzag is also common, but again, the idea here is simplicity. We're all teaching probably full-time and have a lot of responsibilities and duties. So this is an example, and I will get a little closer view for you on this in the next slide. This is an example of how, let me go back here. These were how I started with the issue proposal, assignment instructions, and then it progressed a little bit. In this example, you'll note there's a little bit more consistency here to provide that information. And so let me go to the next slide and kind of give you a closer view. I will say this introduction banner is a little busy, but I do have a reason for that. This particular image in the background is an image that I use in the course itself. It greets students on the homepage, and it's also on their icon in Canvas. So I see this as a branding tool for my course specifically, but in general, this really could be a little plainer. But I like the idea of having that consistency and also bringing students back to making the connection to the Canvas course, to the infographic, and really thinking of it more as branding. Here, I've started with the chunking, and this is where I kind of in this particular instance, I highlight a lot of information that students seem to miss, and that is also very important to the assignment. And that this is where the F pattern really, starts to shine. Another point and organizational tip would be your headings and subheadings, using that to help guide the reader. We do pay attention to those headings and subheadings as web readers, so use that to your advantage. Another example here is changing the heading up to pull the reader down in their viewing, but then returning to this F pattern. Breaking the instructions down in this way also just gives them a little bit more of a process. And there are many ways you could present this within an infographic. You could do it in a hierarchical order. And I will say, in doing a closer inspection, these are always in process. And I thought, this could have less text. I need to heed my own lessons and reduce the amount of text here. It's not, too overwhelming, but I think I can go back and do some more editing. So that's, future note to self. And then here we have in the footer where in this particular case, I've used this as both a next step, but also a wider connection. So I've connected the issue proposal to the other major assignments in the course to help students see what's coming, and also how this particular assignment fits within the process. Okay, so just a review for top tips, just to save you a little time. These are, lessons that I've learned in creating those infographics. Reusability, try if you can not to make it to date it. When I first started, I would put, spring 2020 or spring 2018, and you don't really need to provide that information. Remember, we're keeping it simple. Also, it saves you time because it means you can use it again each semester and not have to go back and change that. The students know what semester it is. The infographic doesn't necessarily need to have that more dated information. So just a time saver there. Think about reusing it every semester. Templates, we talked a little bit about those. This presentation is a template. I made it in Canva. The infographic that I showed you here, this was made in Piktochart. So they both, and I find I really can transition between those two. They are different, companies and brands, but they are pretty user-friendly and very similar, I feel, in the way that they work. Templates are also great. You won't be, I have yet to find an assignment instructions template. Look at the templates and see if the layout appeals to you, and if you can start picturing how you would break the information down within the template. They are all customizable. You can change the colors, sizes of boxes, the text, the layout. So think of it as a starting point, a canvas, and then as you get into it, you really can adapt and grow and work things to your needs. Types of templates that I typically see when I'm trying to build a new instruction sheet. Here are the ones that I use most commonly. Informational, those tend to be very helpful. The templates usually work well for instructions. A timeline can work well for instructions if you're talking about a step-by-step process. This timeline can simply be changed to steps. Comparison, also helpful depending on the type of instructions you're sharing. And then process, a lot of these will already have, you see here, step 1, step 2, step 3. And there are ways to build in chunks of more text or more images and break this up as well. These are the most common. If you are searching within the templates, I tend to start with typically process or informational. And every now and then there will have a how-to. Those are usually pretty good too in terms of just starting on your template. So just to wrap up quickly, and just to remind everyone that instructions will still be unclear for some. The idea of this is just to reach more learners. We aren't going to reach every learner. Not every student will respond to the infographic, and it won't make sense to everyone, but it will make sense to some if it's done correctly. And we're moving past that one. And then moving on to questions. I have seen the chat, but I haven't actually read anything there yet, just because I was focusing on the presentation. But I'll do that now, and if anyone wants to chime in.
Pam, I'd be glad to help read through those too. I've been following along a little bit here. And first off, I'd like to thank you for this awesome presentation. You've actually given me a lot to even think about in my own course that I teach concerning some assignments. There are assignments and courses, I think, that happen semester after semester that you just know things don't go smoothly. And this is a good opportunity to potentially try to solve that issue. So thank you very much for showing us. And I also admire the progress of your technique. You can clearly see that you've gotten better over time through what you've even shown us here today with those tools. So thanks for making this seem doable, first of all. Simon Ringsmith typed in the chat here an interesting tidbit. If you have a Mac, Apple Pages comes pre-installed, and they have some really good templates to help get started. So that was one of the other things too. I know that there are some programs such as Adobe Spark out there, and Canvas, Adobe Spark, Piktochart, which is a new one for me. It just seems like there's so many easy tools to be able to adapt these techniques out there. Why not try them necessarily? Donna had a question in the chat here. Are the infographics you use in your course screen reader compatible?
That is a good question. I know that there are options for accessibility and usability within infographics. Because I give the text assignment instructions, I tend to use that sort of as my support for the infographic. But that is something I can't give you a definitive answer on, but I believe there are some usability options in terms of the infographics and the design of them.
Great. I know one of the potential workarounds for that too could be using PowerPoint. You can program accessibility and infographic type features in there, but it's not quite as easy to do. And you kind of have to know what you're wanting to put where with those text boxes and everything. But again, you can always provide that textual alternative to those students that need it. And you answered Simon's other question in here. You designed the infographic you showed us later on in Piktochart. Canva, it sounds like you use those pretty interchangeably. Is that correct?
Yeah, I tend to use Canva more for presentations. It's, I think, a little bit stronger in terms of being, they have a lot of more free options, so I like that. But even this presentation today, it was completely free. There were some watermarks, which I don't even know if they showed through, but I could pay $1 if I wanted to get rid of those. I'm like, nah, they're good. I'll give Canva the credit. They deserve it.
Yeah, sure. And it may actually encourage one of your colleagues to go try it if they see where you made it. So who knows? I have another question coming in here. Let's see. Simon said, there are no dumb questions, first of all, Simon, but he asked, Canva has nothing to do with Canvas learning management system, correct?
Correct, yes. But they will come up when you search for them because they're so close.